Welcome back to Hearts Wine from Heart's Distractions, where we uncork the truth about love, relationships, marriages, dating, and everything in between. I'm your host, Alicia Minor Gaines, licensed marriage and family therapist, relationship coach, and your favorite voice for real, raw, and sometimes controversial conversations about connection. This is the space where we talk about the messiness, the beauty, the tension, the passion, and yes, even the petty moments that can somehow turn into full blown relationship debates. Because if we're honest, it's usually never just about the petty thing, it's about what the petty thing represents. Today's episode is titled, Why Your Partner's Netflix Habits Are Grounds for Divorce. Yep, you heard it. Now, before you clutch your pearls, cancel your streaming subscriptions, or text your partner accusing them of emotional betrayal, let me say this. We are having a lighthearted debate, but we're also going deeper than you think. Because what looks like a harmless binge-watching habit can actually reveal something powerful about communication, emotional intimacy, attachment styles, generational patterns, and how couples handle shared time. And if you've ever come home excited to watch your show together only to hear, I already watched it, then you already know that sting is real. We live in a digital age where streaming platforms have become part of our daily rituals. Date nights are built around series, finales. Long distance couples sync up shows to feel connected. Married couples decompress after work with just one more episode, which we all know turns into four. So, when one partner watches ahead, refuses to compromise on what to watch, or scrolls endlessly claiming there's nothing good on, it can feel like more than a preference difference. It can feel like rejection, dismissal, or disconnection. And that's where the real conversation begins. Research in marriage and family therapy consistently shows that couples rarely argue about the surface issues. According to Dr. John Gottman's decades of research on relationships, most conflicts are about unmet emotional bids for connection. In other words, when you're arguing about the show, you may actually be arguing about attention, priority, and whether your partner values shared experiences with you. That's not petty. That's attachment. That's emotional bonding. That's the quiet question underneath the frustration. Do I matter to you in the small moments? On this episode today, y'all, we're going to unpack the psychology behind Netflix cheating, the power struggles hiding behind the remote control, and how generational differences shape the way we consume entertainment and connection. We'll talk about red flags, of course, solutions, love languages on the couch, and how something as simple as streaming habits can highlight deeper relational patterns. And don't worry, we're going to laugh too, because y'all know I'm all about the laughter. Because sometimes the healthiest thing we can do in our relationships is recognize ourselves in the ridiculousness of it all. Yep, I might be added in this too, right along with y'all today. So, if you're dating, engaged, married, in a long-term partnership, or navigating modern love in a digital world, this episode is for you. Because relationships today aren't just competing with work, stress, and life responsibilities. They're competing with algorithms, autoplay, and are you still watching? And maybe the better question is, are we still watching each other? So grab your wine, your tears, your reflections, your emotional honesty, and let's talk about why your partner's Netflix habits might not actually be grounds for divorce, but could actually or absolutely be a mirror into the state of your relationship. Let's get into it. All right. Let's address the elephant on the couch. Is Netflix cheating actually a thing? Now, logically, we know the answer is no. There are no secret text messages, no hidden meetups, no late night, who's that interrogations. It's a television show, a fictional storyline, imaginary characters, and yet, why does it feel like betrayal when your partner watches ahead without you? So let me paint the picture. You and your partner start a new series together. You both agree this is our show. You watch the first 2 episodes cuddled up, making predictions, laughing at the same scenes, pausing to debate plot twists. It becomes a ritual, a shared experience. Then one evening, you're busy, tired, or working late. You come home excited to continue, and your partner casually says, "Oh, yeah, I watched a few episodes earlier, but I can't rewatch them with you." Rewatch them? Sir, ma'am, they already know who dies. They already know the twist. The gasp you were supposed to share has already been gasped. And suddenly, it doesn't feel like it's about the show anymore. What happens in that moment is something researchers in marriage and family therapy will call a rupture in shared meaning. Dr. Gottman talks about how healthy couples build what he calls a shared meaning system. These are the rituals, inside jokes, traditions, and experiences that make the relationship feel like its own little world. When something that was designated as ours becomes mine, it can activate deeper emotional responses. Dr. Sue Johnson, founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy, explains that humans are wired for attachment. We are constantly scanning for signals that our partner is emotionally available and responsive. When your partner watches ahead, your brain may not interpret it as they were bored. Instead, it may register as they didn't think of me, they didn't prioritize us, and I wasn't included. And that's where it starts to feel personal. Now, let's be clear. Some couples truly don't care. There are partners listening right now thinking, please, if you want to watch it. I'll catch up. And that's valid. But for others, well, especially those whose love language is quality time, shared viewing is not passive entertainment. It's connection, it's closeness, it's the ritual of sitting down together after a long day and choosing each other's company. All right, y'all know I'm about to come with some couple stories, right? Okay. So I'm about to tell you about this couple. We're going to call them Marco and Devin. That's where we starting today, y'all. They had been together for 5 years and prided themselves on having a strong relationship. But they kept having these small, reoccurring arguments about streaming. Marco would binge watch shows when stressed. Devin would get upset when he did it without including him. Marco's response was always, "It's not that serious." Devin's response, of course, "It feels like you'd rather connect with a screen than to connect with me." So, when we unpacked it in a session, it wasn't about Netflix at all. Devin grew up in a household where family movie night was sacred. It was the only consistent time everyone slowed down and connected. So when Marco watched without him, that one favorite show, y'all, it unconsciously triggered feelings of exclusion. Marco, on the other hand, grew up in a home where television was background noise. Watching alone was normal. It was how he decompressed. Neither of them was wrong, but their meanings were different. That's the key. Conflict often happens not because of the behavior itself, but because of the meaning we attach to it. There's also something called micro betrayals, a term sometimes used in relationship psychology to describe small actions that subtly erode trust or connection over time. They're not catastrophic betrayals. They're the little paper cuts. Watching ahead once might not matter, but dismissing your partner's hurt repeatedly, that's where resentment grows. And here's where we have to challenge ourselves. If your partner says, I felt left out when you watched it without me, and your response is, you're being dramatic, that dismissal does more damage than the binge watching ever could. Because now we've moved from behavior to invalidation. And the truth is, Netflix cheating isn't about loyalty to a show. It's about loyalty to shared experience. It's about whether you honor the small agreements in your relationship. And those small agreements matter because they build trust, they build reliability, they build the sense that when we say something is ours, we mean it. Now, let's flip it. If you're the partner who watches ahead, you might be thinking, so now I need permission to relax? Not necessarily. But healthy relationships thrive on consideration. It's not about restriction, it's about respect. There's a difference between autonomy and indifference. And let's talk about attachment styles for a moment. If you haven't heard of or learned about attachment styles, I do have an earlier episode in season 1. Go and check it out. Okay? But an anxious partner might interpret watching ahead as abandonment. An avoidant partner might interpret their partner's reaction as clinginess. A secure partner might say, I forgot that mattered to you. I'll wait next time. Same situation, different nervous system responses. So, is Netflix cheating a thing? Technically, no. But emotional disconnection disguised as it's not that deep absolutely is. Because the deeper question isn't, why did you watch the next episode without me? The deeper question is, do you value doing life with me in the small moments? Sometimes love isn't proven in grand gestures. It's proven in whether you wait for episode 6. And if you're laughing right now thinking, we definitely argued about this last week, just know you're not alone. I've been there too. But modern relationships are navigating modern distractions. Streaming platforms may not file for divorce, but the way we handle the conflicts around them can absolutely shape the health of our connection. So before we move on, I want you to reflect. When you felt upset about something small in your relationship, what was the deeper need beneath it? Was it attention? Was it inclusion, reassurance, or validation? Because once we identify the real need, we stop fighting about the show and start strengthening the relationship. Now that we've unpacked whether Netflix cheating is emotionally real, let's talk about something equally revealing: the remote control. Because if you want to see subtle power dynamics play out in real time, just watch who holds the remote in your relationship. It sounds silly, but stay with me. Who usually decides what you're watching? Who scrolls? Who vetoes options? Who says, I don't care, you pick, but then rejects every suggestion? And who eventually sighs and says, fine, whatever you want, while quietly building a case for emotional injustice in their head? The remote can become a symbol, not of control over a television, but of influence in the relationship. Hello. Well, I'm going to bring this home. Dr. John Gottman's research on long-term marriages emphasizes something called accepting influence. In healthy relationships, both partners are open to being influenced by each other's preferences. That means sometimes I watch your documentary about space exploration, even though I barely passed science in high school. And sometimes you sit through my reality show because it makes me laugh after a long day. When one partner consistently dominates the choices, dismisses the other's interests, or refuses compromise, it's no longer about content. It's about consideration. Y'all know I'm about to come home with a story for y'all. And I'm going to tell you that this couple we about to call right here, their name's going to be Aisha and Lauren. And this couple, y'all, been together and married for 7 years. Aisha loved thrillers and intense dramas. Lauren loved comedies and lighthearted sitcoms. Every night, Aisha would grab the remote first. Lauren would say, "It's fine." But over time, she stopped engaging. She'd scroll her phone while Aisha watched her shows. Eventually, Lauren admitted in therapy, "I don't feel like my preferences matter anywhere in our relationship, not just with TV." That's when it got real, y'all, because the remote wasn't the problem. The remote revealed a pattern. Follow me, y'all. When couples repeatedly override each other's small preferences, it chips away at emotional safety. Simon's research shows that small bids for connection, like suggesting a show, sharing a meme, or asking, "Want to watch this together?" are opportunities to turn toward your partner. Haha, did y'all catch that? Okay. Ignoring or dismissing those bids repeatedly predicts dissatisfaction over time. Now, I know some of you are thinking, okay, but somebody has to decide. Yes, and that's true. While decision making isn't the issue, it's the pattern of whether both partners feel seen. And let's not ignore the humor in this, because streaming wars can get dramatic. I've heard couples argue over subtitles versus dubbed versions like they were debating global policy. I've heard, "You always fall asleep during my shows," said with intensity of a courtroom accusation. I've even heard, "You skipped the intro. We always sing the intro together." But underneath the comedy is a serious truth. Shared rituals create bonding hormones. When couples laugh, predict plot twists, gasp together, or even argue playfully about characters, they're co-creating emotional experiences. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone that doesn't care whether you're skydiving or watching a cooking competition. Shared engagement builds connection. So when one partner disengages, multitasks consistently or constantly, or scrolls on their phone while claiming they're watching, the other partner may feel alone, even while sitting next to them. That's modern intimacy, y'all. You're physically together, but emotionally somewhere else. And here's where generational patterns start to sneak in. Some people grew up with television as background noise, like our earlier couple. Others grew up with it as family bonding time. Some see streaming as decompression. Others see it as connection. Neither is wrong, but unspoken expectations create conflict. So let me ask you, when you fight about what to watch, what are you really fighting about? Is it about the genre, or is it about feeling prioritized? Is it about taste or about influence? Healthy couples don't avoid conflict. They learn how to navigate it with curiosity instead of defensiveness. Instead of saying you're overreacting, try asking, "What does this mean to you?" Instead of grabbing the remote automatically, try saying, "What are you in the mood for tonight?" That small shift Inviting your partner into the decision changes the emotional tone entirely. Because love isn't always about getting your way. It's about creating space where both people matter. And if you can't share the remote without resentment, that's not a streaming issue. That's a communication issue, people. Now, let's take this even deeper because the way you argue about Netflix might be rooted in something much older than your subscription. Hello. Now, can we talk about something that doesn't get enough credit in modern relationships, which is generational conditioning? Because the way you approach streaming, entertainment, and even downtime didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was shaped long before Netflix ever asked, "Are you still watching?" Y'all know that pops up on the screen when you've been watching it too long. If you grew up in a household where television was scheduled, you learned patience. You waited a week for the next episode. Cliffhangers lasted days. Watching together required planning. It was intentional. There was no binge culture. There was no autoplay. There was anticipation. That anticipation built shared experience. It built conversation at school or work the next day. It built collective engagement. Then streaming entered the chat. Millennials were introduced to DVR and on-demand viewing. Suddenly, you didn't have to wait. You could record it. You could pause it. You could fast forward commercials. Control entered the experience. Convenience became king. Our Gen Zs, they were born into binge culture, y'all. Entire seasons drop at once. Watching 10 episodes straight is normal. Spoilers travel faster than the show itself. Entertainment is consumed rapidly and often individually. Headphones in, screens personal, and algorithms tailored. So when one partner says, "Let's just watch one episode and stretch it out," and the other says, "Why would we torture ourselves like that?" That difference may not be about impatience. It may be about conditioning. And conditioning shapes expectation. If you were raised in a family where Friday movie night meant pizza, pajamas, and everyone gathered in one room, you might subconsciously equate shared watching with bonding. If your partner grew up in a home where everyone watched separate TVs in separate rooms, they may not attach that same emotional significance to it. That's not incompatibility, that's background. In marriage and family therapy, we talk about family of origin influence. The unspoken rules you grew up with become the invisible blueprint you carry into adult relationships. You may not consciously think movie night equals love, but your nervous system might feel unsettled when that ritual isn't honored. And here's where it gets even deeper. Technology changed how we connect. Couples today are navigating distractions previous generations never had to compete with. It's not just work and responsibilities anymore. It's streaming services, social media, gaming platforms, endless scrolling. Digital distraction has become one of the biggest modern intimacy disruptors. Research from the Pew Research Center has shown that technology can both enhance and strain relationships. While couples report that streaming together can increase bonding, many also admit that individual screen use often leads to disconnection. That's not because screens are evil, it's because intentionality has decreased. The question isn't whether streaming is good or bad. The question is whether it's bringing you closer or quietly pulling you apart. I've worked with couples where one partner uses binge watching as stress relief. They don't want to talk, they don't want to process, They want to escape into a storyline that isn't theirs. Meanwhile, the other partner is craving emotional check in. They interpret the screen as avoidance. Neither partner is trying to harm the relationship, but their coping styles are colliding. Generational patterns also influence how we handle conflict. Some were raised to dismiss small issues. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. Others were raised to address every emotional shift. That sounds like talk about how you feel. So when Netflix becomes the topic of tension, one partner may minimize it while the other amplifies it. And that's where couples get stuck. Because if you dismiss what matters to your partner simply because it doesn't matter to you, you unintentionally communicate that their inner world is inconvenient. I'm going to leave that right there for the people in the back. And know that intimacy cannot thrive where inner worlds are ignored. So when you're arguing about streaming habits, pause and ask yourself, is this a present issue? Or is it brushing up against something older, something learned, something modeled? Maybe your partner isn't inconsiderate. Maybe they never saw shared entertainment as relational glue. Maybe you're not dramatic. Maybe shared rituals were your emotional safety growing up. When we view differences through a lens of curiosity instead of criticism, conflict softens. Because understanding doesn't mean agreement, it means awareness. And awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence in relationships. Now, let's take this one step further because sometimes what looks like a small habit can signal something much bigger if we're not paying attention. And can we be honest? Sometimes it really is just a show. Sometimes your partner watched ahead because they couldn't sleep. Sometimes they forgot. Sometimes they genuinely didn't realize it mattered that much to you. And healthy relationships allow room for those human moments. But sometimes it's not just a show. Sometimes the phrase, "it's not that deep," becomes a pattern of dismissal, a pattern of minimizing, a pattern of subtly communicating that your emotional response is inconvenient. And that's where we need to slow down. One red flag isn't watching ahead. The red flag is repeated invalidation. If every time you express hurt or disappointment, your partner responds with sarcasm, eye rolling, or "you're too sensitive," that's not a streaming issue. That's emotional safety being chipped away. In Gottman's research, contempt is one of the strongest predictors of divorce. Contempt shows up in small ways first: mocking tone, dismissive language, superiority. "It's just TV" can become a micro version of "your feelings don't make sense." I'm going to leave that one right there. Another red flag is consistent prioritization of screens over shared connection. If your partner repeatedly chooses solo binge sessions instead of the limited time you have together, especially when you've expressed that shared time matters to you, that signals misaligned priorities. Now, this is not about policing autonomy. Every person deserves personal space. Every person deserves individual downtime. But healthy relationships involve negotiation. They involve balance. They involve awareness of impact. If streaming becomes avoidance, meaning difficult conversations are replaced with "let's just watch something," emotional intimacy begins to erode. Couples who avoid hard conversations often find themselves emotionally distant, even while physically together. And distraction is one of the most socially acceptable forms of avoidance today. Another red flag is refusal to compromise. If one partner never adapts, never takes turns, never shows interest in what the other enjoys, that's not about taste. That's about rigidity. And rigidity in small areas often mirrors rigidity in bigger ones. Let me tell you about a couple. Yep, we're going to call this couple Danielle and Chris. They had been together about 3 years. Danielle loved sci fi, y'all. Chris loved romantic drama. In the beginning, they alternated, but over time, well, Danielle stopped engaging in Chris's preferences. He'd say he was tired. He'd scroll on his phone. He'd leave the room. Chris began to feel embarrassed about his taste. He stopped suggesting shows altogether. When we unpacked it, Chris said something powerful. He said, "It's not about the movies. It's that I feel like parts of me aren't interesting enough for her. That's the part we miss." When you repeatedly dismiss what your partner enjoys, you're not just rejecting content, you're rejecting a piece of their identity. And identity rejection hurts. So here's the question. When your partner brings up a small hurt, do you treat it as silly or do you treat it as information? Healthy couples see small conflicts as opportunities for deeper understanding. They ask, why did that land the way it did? They don't default to defensiveness. And let's not ignore escapism. If binge watching becomes the primary coping mechanism in your relationship, if you're watching 6 hours a night but barely talking, that's a sign of emotional drift. Not doom, not automatic divorce, but a drift. Relationships don't collapse overnight. They erode gradually through neglect, distraction, and unaddressed resentment. The show didn't cause the problem. The response to the conflict did. So no, Netflix habits aren't automatic grounds for divorce, but patterns of invalidation, avoidance, contempt, and rigidity, well, those are worth paying attention to. And the good news is, red flags are information, not destiny. When we notice them early, we can adjust. When we name them gently, we create space for growth. Because the goal isn't to win the streaming war. The goal is to protect the connection. And speaking of connection, let's talk about how love languages show up right there on the couch. Now, let's bring in something that so many couples are familiar with. Those love languages. Whether you finally subscribe to them or not, the concept introduced by Dr. Gary Chapman has helped couples understand why certain behaviors feel meaningful to one partner and neutral to another. And believe it or not, your streaming habits can tap directly into those love language dynamics. Follow me, y'all. If your primary love language is quality time, watching a show together is not passive. It's intentional closeness. It's sitting side by side, reacting in real time, sharing commentary, laughing at the same jokes, gasping at the same plot twist. For someone wired this way, shared viewing isn't background noise, it's bonding. So when your partner watches ahead without you, it may feel like they skipped an opportunity for connection. Now, if your love language is acts of service, which is mine, y'all, by the way, you might show love by setting up the night. You grab the blankets, you make the popcorn, you dim the lights, you cue up the episode, and if your partner still chooses to binge alone later, it can feel like your effort wasn't valued. If your love language is physical touch, the couch becomes part of the intimacy. The leaning into each other, the casual hand holding, the legs intertwined while watching, it's proximity, it's comfort, and if your partner is sitting on the other end of the couch scrolling their phone instead of engaging with you, it can feel like emotional distance. For those whose love language is words of affirmation, Commentary during a show can be bonding. It sounds like that made me think of you. You totally survived this apocalypse. You always guess the ending. Those small verbal exchanges create closeness for you. And finally, if your love language is receiving gifts, maybe it's less about the show and more about the thoughtfulness of, I saved the episode for you, or I waited because I knew you loved it. That gesture becomes the gift. The key here is this: behaviors land differently depending on emotional wiring. And here's where couples sometimes get stuck. One partner may genuinely not see watching ahead as a big deal because for them, well, entertainment is individual relaxation. Meanwhile, the other partner interprets it through a lens of connection and bonding. Neither is wrong, but without communication, each partner assumes their meaning is universal. So I once worked with this couple. We're going to call them Jordan and Mal. Jordan loved watching documentaries together. It was his favorite way to unwind. Mal didn't care much about documentaries because she enjoyed Jordan's enthusiasm while watching them. One week, Mal binge watched a new series Jordan had been excited about. Jordan felt hurt but struggled to explain why. During the session, he finally said, "It feels like you took something that was supposed to be ours." Mal's response: "I didn't realize it meant that much. I thought you just liked documentaries." That moment shifted everything. It wasn't about the content, it was about the meaning. When couples slow down and say, "Here's what this represents to me," conflict becomes understanding. Now, let's add another layer. Y'all know I like layers. Love languages don't excuse inconsideration. Sometimes people weaponize individuality, which sounds like, "That's just how I am. You're too emotional." But emotional intelligence in relationships means we adapt, not because we're forced, but because we care. Healthy love is flexible. I hope some of y'all heard that in the back. If you know your partner values shared viewing time, waiting becomes an act of love, not a restriction. And if you know your partner decompresses alone through binge watching, giving them space becomes an act of love, not rejection. It's about balance. Relationships thrive when both partners feel consideration. So if streaming habits are causing tension, instead of arguing about the episodes, try asking, what does watching together mean to you? That question opens the door to empathy. Because love isn't just about grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it's about honoring the small rituals that make your partner feel chosen. And speaking of feeling chosen, let's talk about how attachment styles show up when the next episode starts without you. Now, let's take this even deeper, can we? Because the way you react to Netflix cheating may have less to do with the show and more to do with your attachment style. Attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby and later expanded into adult relationship research, teaches us that we all develop relational patterns based on how secure we felt growing up. Those patterns don't disappear when we fall in love. They show up in everyday moments, yes, even on the couch. If you lean toward an anxious attachment style, you are highly attuned to signs of emotional distance. So when your partner watches ahead without you, your nervous system may light up. It's not just, "Oh, you watched the episode." It's, "Why didn't you wait? Did you not think of me? Am I not important in this space? The reaction may feel bigger than the situation because underneath it is a fear of being left out or left behind. If you lean toward an avoidant attachment style, your reaction may be the opposite. You may think, it's just a show. Why are we making this dramatic? Emotional intensity can feel overwhelming. You might minimize the situation, not because you don't care, but because conflict itself feels uncomfortable. Independence feels safer than emotional dependency. So, waiting for someone to watch something may not even register as meaningful. Now, if you're operating from a secure attachment style, your response sounds different. It sounds like, I didn't realize that mattered to you. Next time, I'll wait. Or even, I really wanted to watch it, but I should have checked in first. There's accountability without shame. There's empathy without defensiveness. Same situation, different nervous systems. That's why couples can experience the exact same moment in completely different ways. One feels dismissed, the other feels controlled. One feels abandoned, the other feels criticized. And neither one woke up thinking, well, today I'm going to hurt my partner over a streaming platform. This is where emotional intelligence becomes critical. When you understand your attachment tendencies, you stop personalizing every reaction. You start asking better questions instead of, why are you so sensitive? You ask instead, what did that bring up for you? Instead of, why are you overreacting? You ask instead, what would have made you feel considered? Well, I once worked with a couple, we're going to call them Renee and Alexis. Renee had an anxious attachment style. Alexis leaned avoidant. When Alexis watched shows without Renee, Renee would get visibly upset. Alexis would withdraw further, feeling smothered by the reaction. The more Renee pursued reassurance, the more Alexis pulled back. You know, the classic pursue withdrawal cycle. When they learned about attachment styles, everything shifted. Alexis realized Renee wasn't trying to control her. She was seeking reassurance. Renee realized Alexis wasn't trying to exclude her. She was decompressing in the only way she knew how. Understanding didn't erase the differences, but it reduced the hostility. Dr. Sue Johnson often says that the core question in relationships is, are you there for me? That question doesn't only show up in crisis, it shows up in daily life. It shows up when you suggest a show. It shows up when you reach for your partner's hand. It shows up when you hope they'll wait for you before pressing play. So when Netflix habits trigger conflict, don't just ask what happened. Ask what it activated. Did it activate fear of disconnection? Did it activate fear of being controlled? Did it activate a need for reassurance? Did it activate a desire for independence? When couples move from accusation to awareness, small conflicts become opportunities for growth. Because here's the truth. You're not arguing about episode 7. You're negotiating closeness and autonomy. You're navigating how much space you need versus how much connection you crave. And that's not petty. That's partnership. Now, let's move into something hopeful. Because once we understand these dynamics, we can intentionally shift them. We can turn streaming from a source of tension into a tool for connection. So together we've unpacked attachment styles, generational conditioning, love languages, and red flags. Let's talk about solutions. Because the goal is not to cancel your streaming subscriptions. The goal is to protect your connection while you enjoy them. Here's the beautiful thing about small conflicts. They are low-stakes opportunities to practice high-level relationship skills. If you can navigate disagreement about a TV show with empathy and compromise, You're strengthening muscles that will serve you during bigger, much bigger challenges. The first shift is intentionality. Instead of assuming shared viewing time is automatic, name it. Say, I love when we watch things together. Can we pick one show that's ours? When you label something as shared, you create clarity. Clarity prevents accidental hurt. Second, create simple agreements. Maybe you have individual shows and shared shows. Maybe you agree that if one of you wants to watch ahead, you'll check in first. That check in, hey, I'm tempted to watch the next episode. Are you okay if I do that? It's not about permission, it's about consideration. And consideration builds trust. Third, repair quickly. If you did watch ahead and your partner feels hurt, resist defensiveness. Try something different that sounds like, I didn't realize that would hurt you. I'm sorry. I can see how that felt excluding. Validation doesn't mean you agree it was catastrophic. It means you acknowledge the emotional impact. Research from Gottman Institute emphasizes the power of repair attempts. Couples who successfully repair small ruptures are far more likely to maintain long-term satisfaction. It's not about avoiding mistakes, it's about responding well after them. Another solution is to turn watching into ritual instead of routine. Rituals carry emotional weight. They're intentional. Maybe you light a candle before starting your show. Maybe you have a standing Friday night series date. Maybe you cook something themed around what you're watching. The more intentional you make it, the less likely it is to feel disposable. And let's talk about presence. If you're physically sitting together but emotionally scrolling elsewhere, the bonding opportunity decreases. Shared engagement matters. Laugh together, comment, predict the ending. Look at each other during big moments. Those micro interactions strengthen intimacy more than silent coexisting. So, I once worked with a couple who decided to institute what they called no scroll streaming. Phones went in a basket during their shared show. At first, it felt uncomfortable, but within weeks, they reported feeling more connected, not because the show changed, but because their attention did. Attention is love in action. You don't have to eliminate solo downtime. Individual space is healthy, but when you intentionally protect shared time, you communicate priority. Another powerful shift is curiosity over criticism. Instead of saying, you always ruin our shows, try saying, I realized I feel closer to you when we experience things together. That frames the conversation around desire, not blame. And here's something practical. Alternate choice nights. One night, one partner chooses the show, the next time the other does. It prevents resentment from quietly building. Most importantly, remember this. Streaming habits are symbolic. They represent how you navigate autonomy and togetherness. If you can learn to balance those two on the couch, you can balance them in finances, parenting, career decisions, and life stressors. Because healthy relationships aren't about sameness, they're about responsiveness. I'm going to leave that one right there. When your partner feels heard, they soften. When you feel considered, you relax. When both of you feel prioritized, conflict decreases. Streaming platforms may have autoplay, but connection requires intentional play. And sometimes the most romantic thing you can say isn't I love you. Sometimes it's I'll wait or I waited. Now, before we close this out, let's talk about one final layer. Because sometimes arguments about Netflix are actually symptoms of something bigger. Here's the part where we gently remove the humor for a moment and sit with something a little more honest. Because sometimes the argument about Netflix isn't really about Netflix at all. Sometimes it's about emotional distance that's, been building quietly over time. Sometimes it's about feeling unseen in more than just entertainment preferences. Sometimes it's about loneliness inside the relationship. When couples find themselves fighting repeatedly over small things, what to watch, who watched ahead, who fell asleep during the show, it can signal that deeper emotional needs aren't being met elsewhere. The small conflict becomes a safe place to release frustration that feels too heavy to name directly. It's easier to argue about episode 6 than to say, I feel disconnected from you. It's easier to criticize someone for scrolling during the show than to say, I miss how we used to talk. It's easier to roll your eyes about genre choices than to say, I don't feel prioritized in this relationship. Well, research in marriage and family therapy consistently shows that couples often use surface level issues to express deeper unmet needs. The surface conflict feels manageable. The deeper vulnerability feels risky. Can I bring this home for y'all? I once worked with a married couple, we gonna call them Tanya and Elise. They kept arguing about streaming habits. Tanya would binge watch late into the night. Elise would go to bed feeling frustrated and alone. The argument sounded like they were about screen time, but when we slowed the conversation down, Elise finally said, when you stay up watching shows instead of coming to bed, I feel like you don't want to be close to me. Everything shifted in that moment, y'all. Tanya wasn't avoiding Elise. She was avoiding stress. She used shows as an escape from work pressure. But because she never communicated that, Elise interpreted the behavior as rejection. Once the real conversation surfaced, the Netflix argument dissolved. And that's the work. If you're noticing that streaming conflicts feel disproportionately intense, pause and ask yourself a courageous question. What am I really feeling right now? Is it loneliness? Is it jealousy of your partner's attention going elsewhere? Is it resentment because you already feel emotionally neglected? Is it fear that the connection is fading? Modern relationships are fighting a quiet battle against distraction. Screens are convenient, they're entertaining, they offer instant gratification, but they can also become a buffer between partners who are struggling to communicate. Emotional intimacy requires presence. It requires eye contact. It requires uncomfortable conversations sometimes. Streaming requires none of that. And that's why it's easy to default to it. But here's the hope. If Netflix arguments are surfacing, it means you still care. Indifference is far more dangerous than frustration. If you're arguing, it means something matters to you. The key is to follow the conflict to its roots. Instead of asking, why did you watch ahead? Ask, have you been feeling distant lately? Instead of saying, you care more about TV than me, ask, can we schedule time to reconnect outside of screens? Because sometimes the real issue is not about what you're watching. It's about whether you're still choosing each other. And relationships don't deteriorate because of streaming platforms. They deteriorate when partners stop being curious about each other's inner worlds. So if this episode has you thinking about your last argument, that's not a sign of doom. It's an invitation to look underneath the surface, an invitation to strengthen the foundation. Because love isn't fragile, but it does require attention. And attention in a world full of autoplay and endless scrolling is one of the most powerful forms of devotion we can offer. Now, can I bring this home? Because here we are. We started with lighthearted debate about Netflix habits being grounds for divorce, and somehow we ended up talking about attachment wounds, generational conditioning, emotional safety, and the psychology of attention. And if you're smiling right now, it's probably because you realize what I hope you realize throughout this episode. It was never just about the show. It was about meaning. It was about consideration. It was about whether you feel chosen in the small moment. Modern relationships are navigating distractions that previous generations didn't have to compete with. It's not just work schedules and family obligations anymore. It's algorithms, it's autoplay, it's personalized recommendations designed to keep you hooked. Streaming platforms are literally engineered to capture your attention. So the real question becomes, are you just as intentional about giving your attention to your partner? Because attention is currency in relationships. When you say, let's watch this together, you're really saying, let's share this moment. When you wait for your partner before pressing play, you're communicating, our experience matters more than my impatience. When you check in instead of dismissing, you're saying, your feelings are safe with me. And those micro moments, they add up. Research consistently shows that couples who maintain small daily rituals of connection, shared meals, inside jokes, consistent check ins, shared hobbies, report higher levels of satisfaction and emotional security. The rituals don't have to be elaborate, they just have to be intentional. So, no, your partner's Netflix habits are not automatic grounds for divorce. But your response to conflict around them, well, that absolutely shapes the trajectory of your relationship. If you handle it with defensiveness, contempt, or dismissal, resentment grows quietly. If you handle it with curiosity, flexibility, and empathy, intimacy deepens. Love isn't sustained by grand gestures alone. It's sustained by small, repeated choices to turn toward each other instead of away. So the next time you're tempted to binge without your partner, pause. The next time you feel hurt about them watching ahead, breathe. The next time you fight about what to stream, ask yourself, what am I really needing right now? Because sometimes the real cliffhanger in relationships isn't about who survives the season finale. It's about whether you're still investing in the story the two of you are writing together. And in healthy relationships, both partners stay engaged in the plot. Both partners respect the shared scene. Both partners protect the rituals that make the relationship feel like its own series. Full of laughter, tension, growth, forgiveness, and love. If you loved what you heard today and this made sense for you, I want you to go and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Or better yet, not even just go subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you're listening on Spotify, iHeart, subscribe to those channels too. Go to my website, www.aliciasdistractions.com, for more resources, updates, information. If you haven't already, go purchase a copy of my poetry book, Distractions of the Heart, on Amazon. And of course, follow me on social media, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And of course, the links are in the description. So please go click on those. And until next time, protect your connection, protect your rituals, and remember, sometimes the most romantic thing you can say isn't "love you." It's "I waited." Cheers.